Magick.me is the world's greatest school for magic, meditation, and mysticism. You can learn everything there, from chaos magic to hermeticism to meditation to how to supercharge your finances and take absolute control of your destiny. In short, you get all of the tools you need to turn chaos into beautiful, scintillating order and master your life. It's incredible. You've probably heard me talk about it on the show quite a lot. But check it out. It's growing fast. And I just want to say, if you're confused about where to start, because I have so many courses there, the Adept Initiative is the place to go. The Adept Initiative is the flagship course on Magick.me, and it contains everything you need to know to master the most profound ancient techniques of changing your consciousness and the most modern and cutting-edge tools and systems for absolutely turning your life into a masterpiece. You're really going to dig it. Go check it out, and I will see you in class. It's magick.me, magick.me. Again?
Hi, my name is Matthias Castle.
Okay, great. Keep going.
And my name is Matthias Castle, and my background is in a Bachelor's of Arts and Religious Studies and Philosophy. And I became interested in the Ars Notoria as part of my studies in Western esotericism. And my introduction of it was naturally through Robert Turner's 1657 English translation of a composite work of the Ars Notoria. And for myself, it was an adventure into figuring out the puzzle, because the Robert Turner translation has some imperfections with it, and I sought to translate the original 13th century treatise and discover how the ritual is to be performed.
So I have to interrupt, which I have a completely unrelated question. Is that a vintage CRT screen behind you?
I'm sorry?
Is that a CRT screen behind you for playing video games from the 90s?
Yes. Yeah, the TV, yes.
A man of taste, I see. Very good. Very good.
Yeah.
Those are popular, right? It's like people are buying these TVs from the 90s because they like 90s video games only really look good on them.
That's true.
So is it worth the hype?
Oh, well, we grew up with that, right? Playing Nintendo games and video games on those old CRT TVs. So
was that like expensive and hard to find?
No, really. I got it off of Craigslist years ago.
Not bad. Okay. So
yeah, it was like $25.
Not bad. Okay. Tangent. Okay. Had to ask you about that.
Oh, sure.
Okay. So, all right. So the Ars Notoria, this is a ritual simply for increasing your memory. Is that correct, for university students that were meant to perform this in the Middle Ages to boost their memory?
Yes, that's a big part of it. But you also learn certain fields of knowledge. And in the medieval period, they were interested in learning the seven liberal arts, which include grammar, logic, rhetoric, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. But then they were also interested in the forbidden magical arts as well, which included various divination arts.
So people would have done this ritual with the idea that it would increase their ability to study other forms of magic?
Certainly, yes, that seems to be the case. And the idea is that this book was a fast track to gaining that knowledge and memory quickly. And so it was seen as a shortcut. And so you would take that shortcut to get further along in society and climb the social ladder, as it were.
So would you say that this was basically the medieval equivalent of Adderall for university students, meaning they needed some type of cognitive edge just to get their studies done?
Well, it's certainly a cognitive edge. Yes. They, back in those days, things were taken down. I mean, they had some writings, of course, but things were learned pretty much orally. And so oftentimes you had to memorize what your professor had said. And so a lot of life was dependent on having a really good memory, so you can quote certain authorities on a particular subject, so you could debate with your colleagues and be like, no, Aristotle said this, and therefore my argument is correct. And so having the Ars Notoria to give you that storehouse of memory well established was a great benefit to people at that time.
Interesting. So is this similar to like memory palaces, like that type of technique?
Yes. So it comes from the memory palaces, as we call it today, the art of memory, which has ancient Greek origins, or perhaps even further shrouded in mystery how that technique came about. But yes, they had in the Ars Notoria, that's the central feature or attraction, is these figures that you would use to learn particular arts, that like grammar or your logic or your rhetoric. And these figures were meant to be used in the art of memory, in this particular visualization technique in which you would place the new information within each figure and do this mental walkthrough of like walking through the figure or through this field or through this building or whatever you've imagined, and seeing the different landmarks and images that you've created to memorize the new information from your textbooks.
That's the Ars Notoria, or memory palaces specifically?
Well, it's both. So
Okay.
the Ars Notoria includes the art of memory, or these memory palaces,
Okay.
and its technique. Yes.
So that's really interesting, because memory palaces are a magical technique that's still widely practiced in our society. Like, you don't have to dig that far. You can find maybe not doctors, but you can find lawyers and politicians in interviews saying that they use something like that. Or if you look up memory palaces, this is still a technique that is taught for public speaking. So, I feel like our society is always on the lookout for things that will give us some type of an edge. I'm wondering if this is something that you think might actually be of interest to modern people. I mean, do you see this as being something that people in the 21st century could have an interest in?
Certainly. Like I said, as you said, the same technique is there. What the Ars Notoria brings that's different, or adds to that technique, is the dream visitation one is expected to have of an angel that will come and tutor you as you go and practice the notary art ritual. And you have the angel that's enhancing your mental faculties and your spiritual faculties to get more like a super boost of your memory, rather than just doing the technique mundanely. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So this angel is meant to visit you in a dream or in dreams, and then does the angel tutor you in the ritual or just in general?
It's not exactly clear, but the text does say that when the angel does visit you, that the angel will present certain letters to you, and these letters are to be understood or interpreted in your practice of the notary art.
So do we have any historical record of people doing this or claiming success?
We do not, but we have records of who had possessed the book, such as John Dee and Simon Foreman. There was Dr. Thomas Rudd, I believe, also had a copy of it. But certainly it was in possession of those English Renaissance magicians. And we can, speculate that perhaps they did use it, or perhaps were inspired by it in their own particular magical operations.
Interesting. Have you done this?
I have done a little bit of experimentation, but I reserve any discussion about my own personal experience with it. But I primarily have looked at this as an academic.
Okay.
And looked at just doing the translation work and providing the commentary and giving the historical context on this Ars Notoria.
So why is this so important in historical context?
Yeah. So, well, the Ars Notoria had a strong influence on the 14th, 15th centuries. And as we already talked about, had an influence on the university students who had an attraction to it. But it had also spawned these other derivative works. The one that's most of interest is probably John of Moringhi, the French Benedictine monk who had used the Ars Notoria and wrote his own particular rewriting of the book and had his own particular following in France. And he had stopped using it as the Ars Notoria proper and rewrote it because he had an experience that thinking that demons were involved. And so he sought refuge in the Virgin Mary, who
what was that experience? What was that experience?
Oh, what was that experience?
Yeah.
He had some sort of night terrors or dreams of demons coming to him, and he associated them with his practice of the Ars Notoria. So he, like I said, sought refuge in the Virgin Mary, and she guided him to do a rewriting that was more, I guess, in our terms, more Christian, more holy, something of that sort. And so he did his own book, which is called the Book of Heavenly Flowers of the Flowers of Heavenly Teaching. And his book was, like I said, had a following of other disciples. And then in 1323, his book was publicly burned at the University of Paris. And then there were other writings that came along that rewrote the notary art. And so we have this, it's not just the Ars Notoria itself, but we have this tradition of other writings that people kept having an interest in. And by probably the end of the 15th century and thereafter, it started to wane because the education system changed. And then the scientific revolution occurred in the 17th century. And so that changes the education system. And so whereas the Ars Notoria is built on this, late Middle Ages education system. But despite that, the material that's studied is still of interest to people today. Like I said, arithmetic, astronomy, geometry, all those things are still of interest to people today. So it has a certain appeal. And again, the art of memory certainly as well, as we just said.
Yeah. I'm even thinking about, if you just take a step back, seeing this as maybe like a mental exercise to stave off, for people who are worried about dementia or Alzheimer's. Like, could this be a mental exercise that would be of assistance of just like, I'm assuming there's lots of like memorizing tons of or mental exercise essentially in doing this to boost your memory?
The book itself just follows the memory palace technique, but certainly would have an interest to, I believe scientific studies have shown, memory techniques do boost your cognitive ability, and that would be of interest for those who have cognitive impairments. You walk into the bookstore today, you'll find a magazine about boost your memory,
Mm-hmm.
help increase your ability to remember things and so forth. And it has all the scientific data to back it up for today's, modern readers. So
interesting.
Yeah.
It just occurs to me that, our society now in many ways is so obsessed with cognitive enhancement, or a certain subset of society is tech people in particular are obsessed with, for instance, smart drugs or finding ways to like hack their sleep, biohacking, things like this. But one thing that they never discuss is mental exercise. You'll hear people pay lip service to meditation, but usually what they mean is like an app or at best transcendental meditation. But you don't hear people talking about things like this. Or I just saw that Aeon Books is reissuing Mounty Sadhu's book Concentration. I don't know if you've ever seen that one.
No.
It's somewhat similar where it's from the early part. It's fairly theosophical, but it's just a series of extremely strenuous visualization exercises for boosting your concentration. Interesting book.
Oh, okay.
But walk us through the ritual. If someone like, let's imagine the reader is a medieval monk and you are their tutor, and you are, or the listener, excuse me, is a medieval monk, and you are their tutor here to explain what this ritual is going to be like. What would you tell them? Walk us through step by step.
Oh, wow. Well, you have a couple options, because first I would say you have to look at the work of Julien Veronese, the French scholar who had classified the Ars Notoria in two essential groups. You have a version A and a version B. Version A is the short version of the Ars Notoria, and version B is the long and gloss version of the Ars Notoria. And so those are two separate approaches to the Ars Notoria ritual. And so if we look at the version A, there are some missing, there are some gaps in the ritual, because what we're dealing with in version A is actually an incomplete book, which has been supplemented with additional material. Okay. And we can talk about that separately. But what I've done then is I've helped fill in some of those gaps from looking at version B and then finding some clues in version A. So in some sense, I have helped reconstruct version A, which is 2 months. So you're looking at a 2-month ritual or a 2-month template. So let's say you want to learn grammar, okay? And medieval monks can be interested in learning Latin grammar because Latin was the predominant language at the time. And so you have the first month and the second month. And in both months, you have certain prayers which you have to pray on certain days. So the times are divided up into ordinary days and auspicious days. Auspicious days are based off of the certain lunations or the days of the moon. Okay, so like you're going to start on a new moon, and you have a separate grouping. You have general prayers and you have special prayers. The general prayers are those prayers that are meant to help enhance your mental faculties and your spiritual faculties to communicate with the angel. The special prayers are those specific prayers designed to help you learn the particular field of interest. So you would have 3 prayers for the study of grammar. Okay. So in addition to these prayers, fasting and attaining the dream vision of the angel who's going to tutor you, you are going to be interested in, let's see, the inspection of the figures, right? These notary art figures. And so you have 3 figures for grammar. And so you would pray, you would study your textbooks, and then you would do the inspection of the figures, the inspection of the figures. So you're doing that art of memory technique as you consult the textbook and inspecting the figures. And of course, the memory technique requires you to do it repetitively. So the Ars Notoria instructs you to say, okay, we'll inspect the first figure 12 times, and then you do it 24 times and so on. And so you really train your mind to remember that information on grammar. So that's 2 months. And then you would take that same template to learn your logic in 2 months and so on. So that's version A. I think I'll stop there in case you want to comment on any of that.
No. The only thing that I'm curious about is I'm trying to visualize what this would have looked like. I mean, okay, so first of all, when people were primarily doing this ritual, what century are we talking about?
If you're looking at the version A, that's 13th century.
Okay, so
version B came along in the 14th and 15th centuries.
Got it. So in for version A, if I was doing this ritual, I mean, like, what did life look like for a university student, and maybe in what country would they have been doing this? I mean, are we talking about people getting like a religious monk-like education, or help me visualize what this would be like?
Sure. Well, there was the church was overseeing the education system at the time. So you had young men or young boys who would study in a cathedral setting or church setting. And you also had the rise of the university. So the Ars Notoria, as it exists today, had appeared in the 13th century of northern Italy, probably circulated at the University of Bologna, which is the oldest university founded in Europe in 1088. So you have those two settings. And you're also looking at your target audience of young men, and usually it was elite men because they were the ones who got an education, whereas the common serf did not. The serf was often doing what they called the mechanical arts or practical arts, such as tailoring, you know, shoe repair, farming, et cetera, et cetera. So the Ars Notoria was primarily interested in the liberal arts, which was for the elite or the upper class.
So what age somebody was studying this? Like, are we talking about like 18, 19 or younger?
Could be younger, yeah.
Okay. And in a church-like setting? I'm a little unclear about how the university system differs from the church system at this time period.
Sure. So at the university, you would go into the lecture hall and perhaps listen to your professor read out a book, or he may lecture. You might be able to have some scraps of paper to jot down notes, but a lot of times you had to memorize the material or you had to borrow a book that he was reading from. And, there's a sense that there weren't very many copies for it to go around for everyone. And so that's why the importance of memory is so important. Whereas in the cathedral or church setting, you probably had a priest or a monk that was instructing a group of boys. And I mean, it'd be similar. The priest is still instructing the boys. But as far as the Ars Notoria is interested in, if you're looking at a setting aside from like doing this in your own home, excuse me, let me say it. And then version B, it does actually give us some details on this visualization that you're asking for, is it because it will say, it takes 4 months in version B, and the fourth month, that's when you do the inspection of the figures, and you're doing a lot of the heavy prayers and rituals. Everything's kind of coming to a climax in the ritual in the fourth month, and at that time, it says that you can bring in your master who would instruct you in the notary art. He will help you to pronounce the prayers, and you are to seclude yourself from the rest of society. So if someone was to come at your door, you might have an associate or assistant that would actually answer the door for you, so you would be left undisturbed. And your associate is not to disturb you when you're doing your prayers or to see you do the inspection of the figures. And your associate would bring you your bread and water, but they would not enter the room. So only the master could help you do the pronunciation of some of these strangely formulated prayers. Because for anyone who sees the Ars Notoria, you see some of these words or these prayers are very strange to our eyes, and it looks like gibberish. But the Ars Notoria claims that these are prayers that include the names of certain angels, and that all that was derived from King Solomon, according to the story.
So I have a broader question then, which is, and assume I know nothing. What is the Solomonic tradition? I mean, what is it really? Because not at the surface level, but at the deep level, where did it actually start other than where people claim? What was its impact on society? And what was it really? What was this legend of King Solomon? I know that this, has become very, very popular going back to the Solomonic texts. So what's going on there?
Yeah. Well, when people say Solomonic tradition or the Solomonic magical tradition, I'm really thinking about the personality of King Solomon. There's this the this over this centuries, there's this development of this King Solomon as a magician, or King Solomon as a hermetic sage who is very wise. And all that really stems from, right, the biblical account that King Solomon, and this ties in with Ars Notoria, that King Solomon had gone up to the mountain and he made sacrifices to God. And that night, Solomon had a dream, and God came to him in a vision and said, "What would you ask of me?" And King Solomon asked for wisdom, and God granted it to King Solomon. And so that is the biblical narrative, that King Solomon became wise. And so the magical tradition built upon that. And we see that in the Greek magical papyri, we see it in the Testament of Solomon, and then we see it in various other medieval and Renaissance magical writings like the Key of Solomon and the Megaton and so forth. So all these works are different, and none of them were written by the same person, right? And that one person wrote all these things because they crossed so many centuries. So it's this development of this personality, and not all the magical techniques are the same across all these texts. So you're really just looking at a name associated with these magical texts. And a lot of times that was because the true author of these works was wanting to be anonymous, or wanting to provide credibility, authority to what he is saying. And so they assigned it to King Solomon.
Interesting. Was there any type of class distinction to the people that were reading these? Like well, first of all, who was you've touched upon this a little bit already, but who was the audience in general for these grimoires, and was it a certain class of society?
Well, what I have studied on my own is a lot of times these grimoires were studied by lawyers and doctors. So you're probably looking at a highly educated upper class segment of society.
Okay, that's quite interesting. And, I know from Stephen Skinner's work that, just on Enochian, he talks about Dr. Rudd and this kind of aristocratic tradition of angel magic that carried on those texts from past D's time, but it was always very wealthy people who were kind of reclusive aristocrats. So that's quite interesting. And is that's something that you put in contrast to, for instance, the folk magic of the time? Because you read Agrippa, and Agrippa has all this folk magic. But the question is, is this something that was actually being practiced widely? And was there a class distinction to that also? Were there different, basically what I'm asking is, were there different types of magic for different types of people at this time?
Oh, well, certainly. Yeah, there's certainly folk charms and so forth practiced in the medieval period, but that is generally not found here in the Ars Notoria.
So why would it have been lawyers and doctors studying this?
Oh, well, I was speaking about the grimoires generally for
okay.
the upper class. Okay. So I mean, now we were thinking like 15th century Renaissance period. That's what we know. You're talking about the Key of Solomon and so forth. But the Ars Notoria, like I said, is probably aimed young boys or men who were interested in learning to enhance their cognitive ability and their knowledge.
Very interesting. So young men were aspirational even then. That's great. What was I going to ask you? I just blanked. See, I need Ars Notoria. Suddenly, my memory is blanking in a conversation about a memory improvement.
Well, I can talk to you about the version B.
Yes, please do.
So,
now I know. I remember what I was going to ask you, but I'll.
Oh.
Okay, don't lose version B. What I was going to ask you is, I've always wondered how much of the grimoire tradition, particularly the early grimoire tradition, is, let me say, inspired or even kind of ripped off in a non-understanding way from, the Kabbalah being brought into Europe by a Sephardic Judaism during that time, like the Lurianic Kabbalah, everything that was happening in 12th century Spain. Because you read a lot of these things, like for instance, the Key of Solomon, and there's all these badly translated Hebrew words, and people have tried to write Hebrew, and it's not, they haven't even got the letters correct, and it's almost like a parody of Jewish writing with this like implicit assumption of like, oh, like there's something evil and supernatural here, which obviously there's political dimensions to that, but that's something I've wondered about. I don't know if that's something you've touched on at all in your studies, like where that kind of where the grimoire tradition related to Jews coming into Europe.
Oh, well, that is an interesting thought. What I can say is that I did find a Hebrew version, or I should say another scholar had found it, and I now presented it here in the book. There's a Hebrew version of the notary art, and it's incomplete. And perhaps, one could interpret it as maybe there was an original Hebrew Ars Notoria, and then a Latin followed, but still more studies need to be done. But I had a good rabbi help translate part of that material for me, and I presented it here in the book. I believe it was from the 14th century in France by a Jew had written it. I believe there's 14 prayers in it, which most of them seem to correlate with the general prayers, those ones for enhancing your mental faculties. But as far as the Kabbalah part that you're talking about, the notary art seems to my mind to be related to notaricon, which is a Jewish exegetical method of interpretation of scripture. And so the notaricon, or that particular esoteric interpretation, was presumably done by King Solomon himself. And that's how these prayers seem to have these strangely formulated prayers that appear to be gibberish to us, that it's actually the work of the notaricon interpretation, where a single word is expanded upon to a sentence, or vice versa, an entire sentence is then compressed into a single word. And so that gets into what I would say the mythology, or the mythical origin story of the notary art, in which King Solomon had received the notary art from the angel Pamphilus in a dream, and was instructed to write down these particular prayers that would help gain the knowledge that he sought. And so you have these supposedly at least 3 Hebrew books that were given to King Solomon, and then he took the best of them in his own writing called the Book of Flowers of Heavenly Teaching, which is not to be confused with the French Benedictine monk John Maury's book of the same title. But in King Solomon's compilation, that was then passed on to Apollonius of Tyana, who is a Greek philosopher in the 1st century. And he was the one who then translated that into English and helped decode some of these strange prayers. And they were then presented to us in Latin with a very strong Christian tone.
Wait, you said Apollonius of Tyana in the 1st century translated it into English?
No. Apollonius translated King Solomon's book, the Book of Flower, Book of Heavenly Teaching, into Latin.
I was confused. Okay, all right. Okay, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So King Solomon's book, which was a interweaving of Hebrew, Greek, and Chaldean languages, that was translated and decoded by Apollonius of Tyana into Latin.
Okay.
And then from the Latin, then I did the translation work into English.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right. Okay. I got the sequence mixed up in my head. Okay, great. So do we have any historical information on who King Solomon actually was, or even if he existed at all?
That is a good question, and I'll leave that to the biblical
Okay, so
scholars.
we don't know. And who was Apollonius of? Sorry, go ahead. But
Apollonius.
yeah,
He
who was
was
Apollonius of Tyana, and why is he important to the Western esoteric tradition?
he was a first century Greek philosopher, a neo-Pythagorean, favoring the Greek thinker Pythagoras, and he's important for the Ars Notoria because, and this is where I think we're looking at his was called the Book of Golden Flowers, and the Golden Flowers is a selection of extracts from King Solomon's book. Okay, and that book is incomplete, and then it was then added to by supplement with some other Christian writings, and so the Golden Flowers was probably of a Greek and Byzantine origin. And those writings were passed to the Latin West by the Arabs, because the Arabs were interested in translating Greek works, mathematics, and philosophy, and so forth. And they were also interested in astrology. And there are a number of treatises related to astrology and Apollonius. And so that's where the esoteric and hermetic tradition intersects.
So I have a potentially politically sensitive question then, just listening to you, which is we hear a lot about the Middle East and the Arabic world, the Islamic world being the source for alchemy and mathematics and things like that. But is it possible that that knowledge was actually them drawing from prior Greek knowledge that they had access to?
I'm sorry, could you word that again?
So just kind of extrapolating from what you're saying, we're often told that the Arabic world was the source of, for instance, alchemy and mathematics, certain types of mathematics, and brought a bunch of knowledge, advanced knowledge into Europe in the Dark Ages, and in a sense was the only bastion of knowledge, perhaps in the Dark Ages. Some people have argued, but is it possible that those were not original advances in the Arab world? That those were that was prior information from Greece that they had access to?
Right. Yeah, some of it was. And
Okay.
so the Arabs they're translating Aristotle and Plato, and they were like, oh, this is really interesting. What, scientific discoveries can we make on our own based off all these Greek writings that we've translated? And that's what they did. And that was considered the golden age, the Islamic world. So you're looking at.
Okay, so that is really interesting, because then basically what I could riff off of from that then is, can we make the argument that the golden age of both the golden age of Islam that you're talking about, of Islamic knowledge, and the Renaissance were both prompted by suddenly having access to texts from ancient Greece and Rome, from the classical world? So neither one of those was like an advance in knowledge. It was people just discovering earlier text.
Yeah. It's a rediscovery.
I feel like that little distinction right there, that's kind of like that's kind of a big deal. I mean, it's similar to asking who started the who started the Crusades, basically, like who shot first. It's a little bit like that question. But yeah, okay, so that's super interesting. Sorry to tangent, but go ahead.
Oh no, that's very important, because in the 12th century we have they called it the rediscovery of Aristotle, because the Arabs were bringing translations to the Latin West, and we see that influence here in the Ars Notoria, because if you look at some of the text, it references Aristotle's works directly. So that was definitely of interest here in the 12th and 13th centuries at the advent of the Ars Notoria.
Could an argument, like a through line, is it as simplistic as, and I don't think it is, I'm curious what your thoughts are, but is it as simplistic as, okay, well, Greece and Rome fell, there were the Dark Ages, finally the whatever remaining information there was rediscovered, and then suddenly everyone got smart again. We invented science and everything was great from then on. So it was basically all we needed to do was pick up the text from back then. Like walk me through that. I mean, where I mean, there's a lot of questions that provokes. It's like, what was so special about the material from the ancient world? Did our culture fully absorb it, or did we just move on to a new paradigm? How did that relate to the birth of science? I mean, these are big questions.
These are very big questions, and I don't think there's a simple answer to that. I think we're kind of, just making broad, sweeping strokes here, and that's really getting.
Basically, basically what I'm saying is this is as broad of a stroke as I can make right now because I can't do any more detailed. Please do the detailed version of that that's actually accurate if you can.
I feel like you're asking me to summarize centuries of scientific discovery. I don't think I quite.
Okay. Let me break that down. Let me ask bit by bit. Okay, so what? Let me ask this: what was it that was so important and special about the material that we rediscovered from ancient Greece and Rome? Which like the was that just Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, and not in that order? But what was it that was so important about that material that it apparently hauled two cultures out of an age of ignorance?
Well, they called Aristotle the philosopher. They didn't just call him Aristotle. He was the philosopher. And so he brought us, knowledge of science and philosophy and logic. And I can say, coming back to the Ars Notoria, logic was present. Aristotelian logic was present in the Ars Notoria. We also see a little bit of Boethius, who was another philosopher who did a lot of Greek to Latin translation works for us. And his books became the school textbooks used by the students. So they said, did you read your Boethius last night? I forgot. I'm going to fail this quiz, whatever. So Boethius's texts are central to the study of the Ars Notoria and the medieval period.
Okay, so I'm not sure that quite answered my question about what is it that is so great about Aristotle. Like, I know you said that he's the philosopher's philosopher. Okay, I'm not arguing there. But what is it about that material that was somehow able to end the Dark Ages in two different cultures? What is so great? Like, what is it, like make a third eye grow in the middle of your head or give you superpowers just to read it? Or is like the deductive logic and all of that so powerful that it was actually able to prompt, civilizational reform centuries, if not millennia after the fact?
Well, it would be, Aristotle is famous for his deductive logic. Yeah, his syllogisms, his ways to reason things out. People still talk about Aristotle today in philosophy classes. It was a way of thinking about the world, and they applied it to just about every aspect of their lives in terms of reasoning through problems and so forth. It, I, I don't know what more to say.
So I'm thinking, like, could this be said more technically as, from this material, people basically got better algorithms for decision making and verifying truth claims? Basically, what you're kind of suggesting there is it's mental technology, like it's a checklist that somebody runs through in their head, or a process, a methodology that somebody follows, which is could perhaps be expressed algorithmically. Okay, I lost you.
So, okay. I feel like we're deviating away from the Ars Notoria, and we're talking about Aristotelian philosophy and how that's important.
We're talking about a broader thing here, which is mental processes and mental exercises which can improve people's cognition and thereby, perhaps on a broader scale, improve societies. In the case of of Aristotelian logic. So this suggests to me, and don't worry, this is a sales pitch for your book. It suggests to me that, if we're entering a new dark age, as we very much seem to be, that the key to ending the prior dark age and we have data from 2 civilizations, if what you're saying about the Arab world is correct. We have data from 2 civilizations that it was Aristotelian logic that dragged people out of the Dark Age. So this suggests to me that people really ought to go back and study Aristotle, or things like the Ars Notoria that are just simply layering better mental processes than perhaps they're just knee-jerk reactions to social media stimulus.
Oh, well, as you know, as interesting as Aristotle is, I think you're looking at, maybe Aristotle will help us come out of our present darkening age.
Prevent us from going into one, since apparently people need
I don't
rational
think that's
thinking.
going to be. Unfortunately, I don't think that's going to be true, because a lot of 20th century philosophers have basically deconstructed and refuted Aristotelian logic. And in fact, that goes back to the 17th century scientific revolution, where we went from Aristotelian worldview to a mechanicalistic Newtonian worldview. And that's, like I said, other philosophers in the 20th century have provided new ways of logic, and provided that us new ways of thinking about doing logic and philosophy. So in a way, Aristotle has become outdated, but yet he's still relevant because he's very much the bedrock of Western philosophy.
Interesting. So if somebody wants to practice a magical ritual to improve their memory, or if somebody wants to do the Ars Notoria, what are the requirements for them to do it?
Yeah, so that would be preferably having a quiet place to do the prayers, to do the fasting. You need the figures themselves. In the version B, Ars Notoria, you need a hot tea made from saffron and rosewater. But essentially, that's it. It's very simple practice, and I think that makes it more appealing to anyone who wants to try to practice it today, because it's a better alternative to the other grimoires, which require you to have, swords and knives and a circle and all this ritual implements to create and do, which is very time consuming unto itself. The Ars Notoria, it's kind of like pick it up and go, really. And I think doing a modern reconstruction of the ritual is probably going to be more closer to the way it was done in medieval times versus a modern reconstruction of other grimoires.
So I'm looking up saffron right now, and lo and behold, it is a nootropic. I'm just seeing off somebody's blog. As a nootropic, saffron may be used for depression, PMS symptoms, postpartum depression, memory, appetite suppression, and preventing neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's.
Right.
Oh, there you go. That's interesting.
So they were already aware that saffron was available to boost your memory and your mood.
Well, saffron was like crazy expensive back then too, wasn't it? Like ridiculously expensive.
Yeah.
So
because the way you harvest it from the flower is very laborious, and so it's very expensive.
So that would suggest that only extremely wealthy people would have had access to the ability to do the ritual.
Well, again, you're looking at elite young men who would have been practicing this. So they probably would have had the financial resources to acquire the saffron. And both saffron and rose was of Persian origin, which again, to me, suggests that you're looking at a originally Byzantine and Greek origin to the Ars Notoria.
That makes sense.
And then that was then imported into northern Italy.
That definitely makes sense.
Again, that's just hypothesis, and that I don't have hard concrete proof of that, but there's a lot of indicators that suggest that.
It certainly makes sense. I looked up rosewater also, and it says it's believed to have antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, and antibacterial properties, and it's thought to help improve digestion, reduce stress, and improve skin health. So it can be used as a natural remedy for headaches, anxiety, and depression. So that's quite interesting that both of those are actually psychoactive.
Right.
All right. Well, super interesting. I think that probably brings us to the end of the interview, but tell us about where people can find out more about you and get the book.
Yeah, you can look me up at matthiascastle.com. I also have a blog that includes various writings on the Ars Notoria that supplements the book. And the book itself can be found wherever books are sold.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much for being on the show. And it really is a beautiful book. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you very much.
All right. Take care.
Ooh, Claudine Gay. Claudine context Gay. Say the word context the same because you smartass. You smarty pants fuck. Bye-bye. Biggity. Bye-bye. Claudine Gay. You're done. You're done. Sally Cornbluth of MIT, you're up next, you fuck you. We ain't forget about you. You're an embarrassment to Goodwill Hunting and Matt Damon. Claudine Gay, congratulations on being the shortest tenured president in Harvard history. And that ain't taken out of context. Bye. But what the fuck do you do after a downfall like that? A fall from fucking grace like that. And speaking of done, 3 of Hamas's top shitbag terrorists have been eliminated, killed in Beirut. And now we're coming for you, Sinwar. You're hiding. You're hiding. You still can't take a shit. You're hiding, you self-loathing, miserable motherfucker. What a day. What a day, and what a way to start off 2024. We like what we're seeing. I want some more. Okay.
All right. Hope you really, really enjoyed that. I definitely had a lot of fun in that conversation. Meet us at magick.me, magick.me, my school for magic, meditation, and mysticism, where you can learn all the skills you need to unleash your true self. I will see you in class, and until next time, hang in there.